We will now start the Symposium Remembering OKAMOTO Yukio, JICA Special Advisor. This symposium is streamed online live, and the footage will be released in a few hours and archived on YouTube JICA channel. I'll be serving as the moderator today, and my name is Yasuo TAKEUCHI. For 42 years, I served as news anchor at Nippon Cultural Broadcasting, and I am quite active as a freelance. But it was 20 years ago that I first met with Okamoto-san in my own broadcasting program. Somehow, he took very good care of me, and the shock of loss 1 year ago has not gone away. And today, I am thinking of paying back for what I've received from Okamoto-san. Now, today, in commemoration of and in remembering the important footprints Okamoto Yukio-san has left in Japan and the world, we hope to discuss with you about the vision he had for Japan and the world, and to think of what the role of Japan in the international community is, as well as what we should do as individuals. Part 1 consists of lectures and part 1 of panel discussion. And in part 2, we will hear from close friends of Okamoto-san who've sent us video messages. Part 3 will consist of the second half of the panel discussion. Now, let me invite Mr. Kitaoka Shinichi, President of JICA, to give an opening remark. President of JICA, I am Kitaoka Shinichi. On behalf of the organizer, I'd like to say a few words in expressing my sincere condolences to Okamoto Yukio-san. Some of you might be wondering why JICA is the organizer. As a matter of fact, JICA had engagements with Okamoto-san, and from around 91, for close to 30 years, I've had close relationships and engagements with Okamoto-san on many fronts. And we've asked Okamoto-san to serve as a special advisor at JICA, and since he was keen on looking at Africa with his own eyes, we've asked him to make visits to Africa, and he was deeply moved. And that he was trying to open new horizons of his own new business. And with that in mind, we decided to host this symposium. After going to Africa 3 times, we discussed where to go next. He loves the ocean, and therefore we asked him, how about the Pacific? And he had a lot of enthusiasm for those who passed away at war. And how about the island nations in the Pacific, we said. Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal was one of the destinations that was in our plan. But this was on the 14th of April last year that he was to depart. He was unable to go because of COVID. And as a result, he was infected with COVID and passed away. I still cannot believe if his visit was successfully conducted, I believe he would have lived to this day. And that is why we insisted that JICA would like to host this symposium. We have consulted with Okamoto-san's family and Okamoto Associates and many people who have had much longer relationships with Okamoto-san. We at JICA said that we would like to take this honor of hosting the symposium. And I want to extend our deepest appreciation to everyone. Takeuchi-san, Ando-san, thank you. And also Mr. Armitage from the United States, and also those of you who are joining us from Okinawa. I thank you very much for this opportunity. And another point which I would like to point out is the driving force of holding this symposium was actually the junior people at the JICA. They learned a lot by being embraced by Okamoto-san, and they wanted to pay back what they received. And this, I think, is the great charm that Okamoto-san had as a person of educating the younger generation, which we will talk about in the second half. I met Okamoto-san. This was about 91 after his engagements in the Gulf War. And in 94, at Dartmouth University, Dartmouth College, we joined 2 nights, 3 days. We got together at this conference, and we get to know each other very well. And from 2001, under the Koizumi cabinet administration, there was a Koizumi task force, which started, and it was led by the chief cabinet secretary. And the real leader was actually Okamoto-san. And we've had a lot of discussions. And along the same line, we went to Afghanistan to see what's going on at the site. And also, apart from that, under Abe administration, the role of Japan in the 20th century, looking back on that and to think about our role in the 21st century, we had this round table discussion, which is called the 21st Century Roundtable Discussion. We've had a lot of discussions in that, which gives me good memories. And Mr. Abe's comments came out of that discussion. He was always full of life, and I really cannot believe we don't have him with us together. I could never imagine how he would look when he was old. He was like a young boy, full of curiosity and full of energy, full of life. What I was about to say was that he said, "Kitaoka-san, I've never been to sub-Saharan Africa. I want to go." And I said, "Oh, that's a great opportunity." And came up with ideas and plans to ask Okamoto-san to go to sub-Saharan Africa. He actually went. And the Japan Overseas Cooperation volunteers and JICA staff members, and also the young people who were very active in the field. He was very moved by them and inspired by them. And the young staff members at JICA who were supporting such activities were greatly inspired by him and became great fans of Okamoto-san. And as was briefly mentioned, there are 2 meanings to this symposium, and that's why we have 2 sections, 2 parts. For one, as the advisor to the Prime Minister and as a diplomatic critic, and his activities as a diplomat, his activities are well known to the audience, but we want to look back on what he's done and also think of what he envisioned to see as Japan in the international community. This is what we want to discuss in the first half. And the second half, we want to focus on the personality, the character of Okamoto-san. Why did he attract so many people? That is going to be our focus in the second half of our symposium, because we want to build on that. Just one person, not being tied by an organization, and being able to freely think and act. This is something that we must succeed from him. This symposium has a subtitle, Navigating Japan's Route in Uncharted Ocean. How would Okamoto-san think if he were here? This is the spirit that we want to receive from him. In a commentary that I've received, in my eulogy, I refer to Okamoto-san as a fervent soul and a true realist. He is a specialist in national security, but beyond, on the other side of security, he knew that there are real people. And I often talk about realist or liberalist, and I don't like that kind of way of thinking. True realist would understand the feelings of individual. Without the understanding of feelings, there is no realism. So in that sense, I think he could be referred to as a true realist. And he was able to find his way out through the fervent soul and enthusiasm that he had. But in a sense, maybe he was not a true realist, or maybe that was how a true realist should be, like Okamoto-san. And I take the latter position. Today, I'm looking forward to engaging in discussions with you. What laid in Okamoto-san was the kindness to others, to try to understand others, and to show respect and care. That's the kindness. And so while we are remembering Okamoto-san, but always referring to remembering him and so forth, it doesn't sound like Okamoto-san. He was more proactive and forward-looking. So I want to make this a symposium where we will be thinking proactively about our future and about the young generation. And with that, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Kitaoka. Next, from Okamoto-san's days of diplomat at the Foreign Ministry, he has been a very close friend. I would like to ask Ambassador Kenichiro Sasae, the President of Japan Institute of International Affairs, to say a few words. Thank you for the introduction. President Kitaoka of the JICA and staffs of the JICA, I would like to offer my appreciation for being invited to the symposium in memory of Mr. Okamoto. It's been about a year since Okamoto-san passed away. I cannot still believe that he is no longer with us. His wife, Kyoko-san, and his the brother, Yasuo-san, and Sawafuji-san, who has been a long time assistant and secretary to Okamoto-san. And there are many family members and friends with the special memory and thoughts about Okamoto-san. Okamoto-san was really a good man. I think that he was a big brother to me, so I cannot be that of an objective in my perspective. But let me try to be calm and give you an objective view of what kind of a person Okamoto Yukio was, as was mentioned by Mr. Takeuchi and Mr. Kitaoka. That he was a versatile man. He had the multiple colors. He was not able to be assessed by just one prism or one perspective. His career is well known to all of you, but I would like to mention 10 major achievements. One is that he was a diplomat. He started as a diplomat, and although he has been involved in different jobs and different projects, I think he was first and always a diplomat. And in the last days at the Foreign Ministry that he had to deal with the Gulf War and Cold War, those difficult issues, that he was very sad, but he was always out into the field when he was the director of the North America Security Division as well as First North American Division. Then he became the president of Okamoto Associates. He has been involved in business management, and from a few years ago, he was always saying that he would be selling the dried squid when he was still at the Foreign Ministry. And I believe he was surreptitiously telling me that he was leaving the Foreign Ministry. And that he has become special advisor to the Prime Minister during the Hashimoto administration as well as Koizumi administration. He had been involved in the Okinawa issue. He was always busy and running around. And although I have heard the confession from Okamoto-san, and he has been grumbling, and that he has told me the criticism, but I always thought that he will be able to achieve his aim. And he was also a foreign policy commentator, a critique. He was always raising alarm on many of the difficult issues. He was a writer. He was writing about Iraq, and he was writing about all sorts of things. And he has, towards the end of his life, become a novelist. The elderly the fisherman and the fish and the young boy, and those were the themes of his novel. He said that it was a love story. But I thought he meant love of his life, love of human beings. I'm sure it will be mentioned later. This was a phase and a world that he did not show to the public, to the outside world. As Mr. Kitaoka has been saying, he was also an educator. He was a professor at the university. A little before passing away, in December of 2019 at Ritsumeikan University, many students were visiting his apartment, and it was so crowded. And Okamoto-san was listening to the comments of the students, and also he was entertaining the students. Whenever he was at a certain party or at a certain group, he was truly an entertainer, always making people happy and people enjoy. He was also a volunteer and activist. At the time of a great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, he has launched the fund to help the fishery industry. He was very cheerful, and he never grumbled or told me sad stories about the project, but I knew the difficulty he was going through. He was a practitioner of dandyism. He loved the ocean. He bought the cruiser, and that he was trying to compete with Kaima Yuzo, the famous actor. That he enjoyed scuba diving. That he took underwater photograph, and that with photographer Mr. Nakamura. And when he took pictures, he was almost professional. Many of his friends were sent his photograph through postcards, and was able to see a glimpse of what he was able to see, deep undersea. He always had asked me to accompany him, but I always responded, I have an ear problem, so I cannot really join you. But he, I'm sure, suspected that I was fearful of the sea. He was also very warm-hearted, always thinking about his subordinates. Many people has written in the commentaries and in their eulogy, he was always taking care of the guards, the drivers, chauffeurs, and the people who were underprivileged. And he was always entertaining them, trying to give the fun a time for many of the people. He always told me a job is to think about those people in the front line, at the very bottom, and to try to make sure that they are being able to fulfill their dreams, and that they are able to, in a vivid manner, enjoy their life. I don't think I was not able to do as Okamoto-san has been telling me about during my lifetime, how I should treat my subordinates and the people under me. I was trying always to be like Okamoto-san. he was also a devoted husband, that he was able to do whatever he pleases is because he was supported by his wife, Kyoko. And I'm sure now in heaven, Okamoto-san is looking down upon us for this event, and I'm sure he is sincerely grateful to Kyoko. Now, what was that we were given from Okamoto-san? During the panel discussion later, there will be many stories to be told. Many people speak of the passion and action, and as a realist, all the different the activities that he has undertook. Now, the people were fascinated by these attraction, and they were educated and encouraged, and sometimes to be at his mercy, to be ordered around to hinder and yawn. But he always was entertainer as well. He often came to my house, and we had drinks, and he would show me his photos, even to my mother-in-law living with me. And he was always telling her how attractive and how charming it is to be under the ocean, how fascinating a world that you can find. And when I was this morning telling my mother-in-law that we have this memory event, she told me, so Okamoto-san, he was always wearing something like a diver's suit, and he was really a good man. He was always showing beautiful photograph from undersea. Okamoto-san was loved by everyone. Now, at the end of his life, what he wanted to send as a message to us in the world. And from few years before he passed away, I don't think he anticipated that he may die, but his grandfather and grandmother, as well as the problems faced by Japan when he was born, and ever since then, that he was writing a book about the history of Japan. He has put all his energy in writing this book. But I'm sure he was trying to make this book the epitome of his life. Now, when he was infected by the COVID-19 virus, he was carried to hospital. But even at the hospital, he had his the personal computer, and that he was still continuing to write. And I'm sure the last chapter would be the message to the Japanese youth. And that is also what I was informed by Saofuji-san, his secretary. He wanted to ask the young people to build a nation full of pride. And that should be the Japan for them. Now, today, I'm sure those who had being good friends to Okamoto-san, and many of his acquaintances will tell their own stories and about the period that he rushed through. So I would like to end my remarks here. Thank you.
どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sasai. Now let us start panel discussion part 1. Those of you who are joining us through YouTube, we have a request. There is a questionnaire section. If you have any messages for Mr. Okamoto or any comments about the symposium, feel free to enter your comments. Now, navigating Japan's route in uncharted ocean. This is the theme. China, United States, Japan, the Middle East, United States, and Japan. These are the themes under which we would like to engage in discussions. And before the discussion, I would like to introduce Okamoto-san. Okamoto-san was born 1945 in Kanagawa Prefecture. After graduating from Shona High School and Department of Economics at Hitotsubashi University, he joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1968. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he took important positions such as permanent delegation of Japan to the OECD Japan Embassy in Egypt and the United States, director for Japan-U.S. Security Alliance, and First North American Division. In 1991, after the end of the Gulf War, he left the ministry as the director of the First National American Division and established Okamoto Associates. He later served twice as advisor to the Prime Minister in the Hashimoto and Koizumi cabinets. When he was the advisor to Prime Minister Hashimoto, he went to Okinawa more than 50 times, and when he was the advisor to the Prime Minister Koizumi, he went back and forth between Iraq. He committed to a hands-on approach. He demonstrated his hands-on approach in 2011 in the aftermath of the Great East Japan earthquake. He showed up in the fields in Tohoku countless times, engaging in discussions with the local victims, and set up the Kibou no Noroshi Fund, the Signal of Hope Fund, for an early recovery of the Tohoku fisheries industry. He was also passionate about education and worked hard to train young generations. As visiting professor at Ritsumeikan University, specially appointed professor at Tohoku University, and senior fellow at MIT Center for International Studies, he engaged with many students. At Ritsumeikan University, where he taught since 2003, he created a scholarship program to send students on international training programs every year. From 2017, he became special advisor for JICA and visited sites across 8 sub-Saharan countries, offering advice on JICA organization, operation, and business. Many JICA staff members were under the tutelage of Okamoto-san. We have with us, as the moderator for Part 1 and Part 2 of the panel discussion, Ms. ANDO Yuko. A familiar face to many of you, she is the greatest news anchor of the generation, and she was a longtime friend of Okamoto-san. Let me introduce our panelists. Mr. Kitaoka Shinichi, President, JICA. And next, Mr. Sasae Kenichiro, President of the Japan Institute of International Affairs, and visiting professor of Ritsumeikan University, Mr. MIYAKE Kunihiko, who is currently the special advisor to the cabinet. He was a junior co-worker of Okamoto-san and had a relationship of trust beyond the Ministry of Foreign Affairs organization. He is an expert in international affairs. And lastly but not least, from the United States, we have Mr. Richard Armitage. He had both business and personal relationship with Okamoto-san, and one of the Americans Okamoto-san trusted most. They've known each other since Okamoto-san was working for MOFA, and when Okamoto-san was advisor to the Prime Minister, Mr. Armitage was Deputy Secretary of State under the Bush administration. They both served and worked hard for their governments. Now, let me pass the microphone over to Ando-san. This is Ando speaking. Thank you very much for joining in this panel discussion. My involvement with Okamoto-san, I will not be able to stop if I start. And so I just want to share with you just one topic. This was from the latter half of the 1990s that I looked at Okamoto-san as my teacher for national security. And I took this away from my pet, my dog. This is Trump doll, puppet. And actually, Okamoto-san, after he died, it was delivered to me in my home. Okamoto-san from the United States bought this as a souvenir for my pets, for my dogs. I was not able to receive from him, but it was delivered to me after his death. His head is already bitten by my dear dog, but how should I handle this doll that was left to my dogs to decide? But I think that was one of the message from Okamoto-san. If he were here, how would he think? How would he have acted? Those are some things that I would like to think about, and also invite all of you to think about in discussing about how to charter our way going forward. Now, without further ado, from Washington, D.C. in the United States, Mr. Armitage, thank you for joining us today. You've had a long-term relationship with Okamoto-san. That's where I want to start. And Mr. Okamoto, Japan and the United States, in this relationship, what was his role?
Well, first of all, Ando-san, thank you very much for your moderating. And I'd like to say hello and thank you to Dr. Kunihiko, Ambassador Sasai, and Professor MIYAKE, all good friends of mine. And before I answer directly your question, I want to set the stage, if I may. My utmost appreciation for JICA for organizing this event, and my affection and love for Kyoko. I know how sad she's been. I know how much I've thought of her, and I'm sure all of Yukio's friends have thought of her. I actually was at their wedding reception, which was held in Georgetown, next to the Four Seasons, in the early part of the 80s. And it was Kyoko and Yukio who were the first Japanese people to ever invite me into their home. And it was Gaimasho housing. As Ambassador Sasai will remember, those were quite small places and I was fairly large. So it was quite a struggle, but I was so honored, later honored to be in their home in Kanebo, right at the foot of the Rainbow Bridge, where Kyoko was so kind to us. And I can remember an oyster omelet that she made. But most importantly, before we talk about some of the foreign policy questions, I want to make a point about Yukio. He reminds me of someone in our history, President Woodrow Wilson, who was a very complicated man. But whenever faced with a problem, Woodrow Wilson would ask himself the following question. He would say, what ought we to do? What ought we to do? And that's what Yukio did. It's what he did in the first Gulf War. As you'll remember, this was the time of the Heisei era with Kaifu Soredaijin, not very active in the Gulf War, Japan being heavily criticized. It was Yukio who asked himself the question, what should we do? And he went out and did it. Got water purifiers for U.S. forces, got other equipment that we were short. He did it. This was not something that his government either sanctioned or didn't sanction, but it needed someone to start. And who started it but Yukio? And earlier, Ambassador Sasai had said that Yukio would be looking down from heaven. In my faith, in the Christian faith, I believe that. But I believe one thing else, too. As much as all of us miss the warmth, the friendship, the caring, loving nature of Yukio Okamoto, it's clear to me that God loved him more. God wanted him with him. So, Ando-san, I'll stop there and we can talk about this great patriot, or we can talk about any of the various things he's done, U.S., China, Taiwan, or anything else that you'd like to.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. What should we do? That was always on his mind. And as was mentioned, as a realist, what should we do? That is, I think, what he was always thinking. Later on, I would like to ask Mr. Armitage of what Japan should do. Now, from Ambassador Sasai and Dr. Hitaoka, we heard about the personality of Okamoto-san, Miyake-san. What was he like to you? He was larger than life, and I cannot express in one word. He has many younger brothers, so to speak, and I am one of them. There are dozens, I think, of younger brothers of Okamoto-san. That's a large family. Yes, indeed. He is a great diplomat. He is a mentor. And the first time I met with him, and actually I have it with me, 40 years ago in Egypt, I was wearing this. Do you know what this is? It says LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department. I was wearing this uniform. I was young. My hair was long like this. And he was my mentor for training. And as a supervisor, I've mistaken I wore this to work. Sorry, Miyake-san, why were you wearing this uniform? Because I was so arrogant. I was a student. I didn't need to wear a tie. I was wearing this. And so, do you know, can you guess what he said? Oh, you look like someone from the rural area. A roughneck, but I'm from the Shonan. But he told me that I look like a roughneck, and he asked me where I'm from. I said Kanagawa Prefecture, and he said, "Oh, really?" And then he asked me, "Where did you go to in high school?" I said Eiko, and he said, "I'm from Shonan." That was a tragic encounter between me and Okamoto-san, and I thought, "Oh, I met a terrible person." But then after that, I started to find out his true self, his energy. And if I may say one more thing, is when he left the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I saw him write this letter of retirement, and I didn't think that he would leave, but I was impressed and convinced that there is a way forward, that is such a life to be made, that there was this idea, this action, and he was persuasive. There will be no person like him. I belong to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but apart from Ambassador Sasai, I don't think of my seniors as supervisors or seniors, but he was different. So you were seeing him write this letter of resignation, but you didn't stop him? He's not a type of person who would listen to me. Okay, so I'm going to write this letter of resignation. This was at midnight, and I went, and he was already writing it. This was at the time of Gulf War, 800 four-wheel drivers, 800 of them. He was determined that he would leave the ministry. He is such a man. I've been following his path, but I still cannot see the back of him. I was able to see it, but I've lost him, and so that's a great shock. Thank you very much for that.
Now, from here, we would like to move into the theme of China, U.S., and Japan. If Okamoto-san was still with us, what would be his thoughts about the relationship between the three? And what is the present relationship that Japan has with China as well as United States? Mr. Armitage, I understand that recently you visited Taiwan. That was reported. And some report says that this was informal visit to Taiwan, being suggested by President Biden. So what was the purpose of visiting Taiwan? And the relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan, and also relationship with China. What is the current state of play, please?
Well, I'll two-part answer, if I may. Directly to your question, President Biden wanted old friends of Taiwan to go see Dr. Tsai and make sure that Dr. Tsai and her colleagues in Taiwan realize that the preservation and continuation and strengthening of Taiwanese democracy is first on his list. Joe Biden is not getting up in the morning and trying to do bad things to China just to cause China trouble. But he wants to do good things for Taiwan because 23.5 million people deserve to make their own decisions. This is something that won't be known to many of our Japanese friends, but Yukio was part of a trilateral U.S., Japan, Taiwan meeting that we held from the late 90s, even up to the beginning of the Bush administration. And such notables as Hashimoto Suridaijin, Abe Shureidajin, before they were prime minister or after, would take part in these trips. We would go either to Honolulu, sometimes to California, sometimes to Tokyo, sometimes to Taiwan, to try to give advice, answer questions, and guide, if you will, Taiwan on the continuing road to democracy. So if Yukio were here today, he would be the one that could say privately, you know, back in the early 80s, we were worried about the Soviet Union in Asia. I saw China coming in Asia a lot before many others did. For instance, the United States didn't really understand until after Tiananmen Square what China was really about. Yukio had already made the switch in his mind, and he realized that in the long run, this neighborhood would be dominated by China if Japan is not one of several things. One, closely aligned with the United States. Two, more closely aligned with Taiwan because of Taiwan's importance in the as an anchor of the first island chain. And finally, what made Mr. Okamoto so complete as a diplomat was not his geographical knowledge or his diplomatic knowledge or his historical knowledge. It was his inner character. He believed in his heart that any individual could make a difference in relations between states, because states, although states themselves may be inanimate objects, the people who work in them and run them and benefit from them are not. And the second part of his character is, I saw demonstrated time and again, he would always treat people better than one might think they deserved at the time, because Yukio would say, you don't know what's going on in their life, so treat them kindly. And this is what made him not only a diplomat, but a flesh and blood diplomat.
Thank you very much. And I want to ask a question to Ambassador Sasae, Mr. Armitage, about his visit to Taiwan. He said that Okamoto-san had always felt the need to maintain the spirit of diplomacy, but the current situation between Japan, Taiwan, the Beijing government, and the United States government, how do you view the situation from your perspective? As was mentioned by Mr. Armitage just now on Taiwan, it was about the democracy in Taiwan, and there's a lot of control taking place between countries. It's about military and security and also economic front as well. But today, between China and the United States, this competition over regime, we saw that in the Cold War between United States and the Soviet Union, but in a different way. The authoritarian approach by China, which was not a problem in the past because the influence of China was limited, but now it has such a huge impact across the world, and they are competing with the United States, and they are not pursuing democracy as we see it. China claims that they are pursuing democracy the way they see it, but we think that the definition is different. So in that sense, Taiwan, in Japan, in Asia, there are different countries. There's authoritarian regimes and democracies. People trip and fall at times, but all the countries are facing towards democracy. The same with Taiwan. There were times in the 1980s when they were facing very challenging times, but they've established the democracy that we see today. And therefore, standing by democracy of Taiwan, what we see in terms of human rights issues in China, what can be, we cannot see it as a domestic issue. And that's why Taiwan is very important. That's how I interpreted what was said by Mr. Armitage. And Okamoto-san, at the time of Gulf War, Prime Minister Kaifu wanted to make a call to President Bush. Okamoto-san was not there because Okamoto-san was in China. He was in China saying that he wanted to study what that country was about. That's what he was saying back then. We would not have imagined that things will develop in the way we know today. And Okamoto-san came back from China and said, well, China is going to develop, but it could become a difficult country. That's what he said from back then. Today, we know how our relationship has become sour with China, but the United States is watching China carefully and collaborating with Japan. That's only common sense. But at the same time, China is a neighbor to us. We have a peace treaty with the country. There's no benefit that we can gain from a war with China. So how we can maintain good connections with China and also make sure that the economic relationship will be of mutual trust, mutual benefit. And so maintaining a relationship of friendship, but also a hostile relationship in this difficult times, how we can maintain and address the situation together with the United States. That's a challenge of this time, and I'm sure Okamoto-san had this in mind.
Armitage-san.
Mr. Armitage, Okamoto-san was always saying things, what you have just mentioned, that as Japan and U.S. relationship gets stronger and stronger, China will not be able to make a move, to make an action the detrimental to us. But if our bilateral relationship becomes lax, China will always try to drive a wedge. So that is what Mr. Armitage has told him, and Okamoto-san was always telling me to make a bilateral relationship between Japan and U.S. make stronger would be the best way forward vis-a-vis China. Do you all also agree?
Ando-san, one thing with living a long time, I'm the same age as Yukio would be, is you have a lot of experiences. And the experiences that we have all gone through in Japan, the bubble and the trouble after the bubble and all of that. The trouble left around the first Gulf War when Japan was seen more as a piggy bank than an actual contributing member for the general public or global good. We've gotten past all those things because it's been in our interest. And right now, here in the United States, and I think it's a true statement in Japan, that our publics have more confidence in each other than ever before. The U.S. Congress views, for instance, Japan in the highest possible terms in history. And I think maybe for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is your own proximity to China, many in Japan take comfort from the fact that the United States has a close relationship with Japan because we're not going to let Japan down. We wouldn't let Japan down. And Japan has done everything to deserve support in the international community and in their own space.
はい。さて、北岡さん。
Dr. Kitaoka, we've heard from Mr. Armitage that the understanding towards Japan is deeper than ever. So please feel reassured. U.S.-Japan relationship is going to be safe. We will not let you down. But in terms of facing China, I think we have our own position as Japan. Ambassador Sasai said that we are friends, but also enemies. At the same time, this is a very difficult relationship. How can we maintain such a relationship? What is the unique position for Japan, and what is Japan's own own way of diplomacy. How do you see it, Dr. Kitaoka, and also in terms of ties with the United States? For one thing, Okamoto-san was very close to China. He went to China and he was seeing the diligent Chinese workers, and he was very impressed that it's only normal that the country will grow. It's the laborers that were very diligent. Yes, that's right. And also he would go to Africa and he would see people who were filled with a sense of spirit that they were working very hard and very diligently. And in Taiwan, under the government that they've elected, the country is growing, and nobody should threaten such a country. So I think Japan is not a perfect country in terms of diplomacy, but with use of force and threat, we should not stop this from happening. And so what would be the role for Japan? That will be the next question. Basically, China, using force, they are very careful and cautious over history. That has been proven. Unless they know that they will win very easily, they will not win. They would only start a fight that they can win. So make them think, China think, that they will not be able to easily win over Japan. That's, I think, very important. 311, 311, when we had that earthquake, the U.S. Army had supported Japan so thoroughly, and I think China was taken by surprise to see such a close relationship. And the Thai U.S.-Japan relationship is so robust. That is wonderful. But with COVID-19, Japan is not very successful. And if China thinks that Japan is not such a impressive country, that could be a problem. So I think we should straighten things out in Japan. I see. So if China thinks that Japan is not such a formidable country with COVID-19, that could be a threat. And so you feel that there is a concern on that part. Yes, there are other things as well, but working on COVID-19, I think, is an important factor. And also another point is that we cannot be completely aligned with the United States because we are so geographically close with China. And so we should not be provoked by China. After 9/11, Japan a thought of immediate action, and there was this Okamoto roundtable discussion, and the minister of foreign affairs back then was quite eccentric. It was a she, I think. Yes, and she was a different type of a lady than you. Yes, I recall doing an interview with Mr. Armitage on that occasion. Well, we thought that we have to do something. We shouldn't be act like at the time of Gulf War. So we thought of supplying fuel in the Indian Ocean. And the first step that we took was to explain to China and Korea. That was the first action. To Koizumi-san, ask him to go to Beijing. And Marco Polo Bridge went to the memorial, and he also visited Seoul. We took cautious steps, and this is very important. I worked together with Okamoto-san, so I recall very clearly.
Mr. MIYAKE, you went to China as well. And as Mr. Kitaoka has said, China is not a country where you should interfere that easily. And that is, I believe, in the background. So, MIYAKE-san, what I would like to ask you, thinking about China, the Chinese the people will always suck up to those the people with a loud voice. So, what should be the unique the way that Japan should relate to China? I had discussed at length with Okamoto-san drinking the whiskey. So whiskey was what was his favorite. So Okamoto-san, are you listening to us in heaven? History would never repeat itself, but sometimes it would give us a good lesson. I am an Arabist myself, but I was stationed in China. But it was Taiwan where I studied Chinese. So I think I do have some knowledge about China. there is something of a repetition of history back in the 1930s. In East Asia, there was a very strong emerging country. And at this moment in time, they think that this is injustice. And with force, they should bring a change. That is something they are trying to justify themselves. And that was Japan in the West Pacific, tried to challenge the hegemony of the United States. And Japan went to Pearl Harbor. I don't think China will make that mistake. But the United States, being afraid of China, has now changed its policy. So this is not something of a transient nature as an issue, but the U.S.-China competition will continue for some time. Then what should Japan do? I would very much like to discuss this with Okamoto-san. Our policy vis-à-vis China, I believe, should be engagement and deterrence. Putting aside which should be given the priority, but nonetheless, both engagement and deterrence, both are necessary. And Okamoto-san will perhaps informally have visited Beijing as well as Taiwan, perhaps, and tried to shuttle between and have done something. What was most impressive about Okamoto-san was those people out in the field. Okamoto-san was always placing importance on that. In terms of national security, he always listened to the people in the uniform, the JASDEF. And I have learned from Okamoto-san how to relate to the SDF, the people. What we need to do is, for deterrence, we cannot maintain the policies and the behaviors of Japan till to date. He was always saying this. The peace means non-military. That was the tenet for Japan in the post-war period. And he has always stated that this is wrong, this is a mistake. So he placed importance on the people in the uniform. Now, if we let things go, China and U.S., which would miscalculate, I do not know. But the clash could happen, realistically thinking. And then, including the uniform to the people, Japan needs to take some kind of action. In any case, we need to be prepared. And if we are prepared, the China would try to deter itself because they would be afraid of taking action. If we are prepared, and this is exactly the issue I wanted very much to discuss with Okamoto-san.
He was a true realist. He often said that peace equals non-military is not correct. I think he talked about utopian pacifist, and the Ambassador Sasai-san also said that we should say when we have to say it. We should not be seen as a country that would always stay silent. And so I guess you are all thinking about the path that should be charted for Japan in a realistic light, as Okamoto-san. But we have to be realistic, and we are running out of time. The next topic is Middle East, the United States, and Japan. He has been deeply involved in the Middle East from the time he was working for the Japanese embassy in Egypt, the Gulf War, and the Iraq War. He was deeply involved in the Middle East. When he was the advisor to the Prime Minister of Koizumi, he has had long-term relationship with the Lieutenant General of the U.S. Army, Mr. Frank Helmick. We have received a video message. Please take a look at this.
I want to thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this wonderful ceremony honoring a great man, Yukio Okamoto. In 2003, I was a one-star general stationed in Mosul, Iraq. My portfolio at the time was to be the outside guy, to look at reconstruction efforts in the northern provinces, to look at agriculture, to look at petroleum, to look at the train system, how we can help improve the country of Iraq. I met Yukio in August of 2003 as he came up to the 101st. He was introduced to the leadership there and he told us he was a special envoy to the government of Japan for reconstruction efforts in Iraq. So that made a perfect marriage for he and I to go around together. And we did a number of times. But I remember one day in particular, it was a long day. We started early in the morning, we ended late at night, and we flew around the northern provinces and hit many villages where we landed and we chatted with the local leaders. And he told them what the government of Japan would do for their country, and I also told them what the government of the United States would do for their country. It was a long day. We flew back to the base camp. We landed, and we got out as we were walking to dinner that night. Yukio said to me, "Frank, do you know what I did?" I said, "No, what did you do?" He said, "I took 260 pictures that day." And he wanted to show each and every one of them to me, as he always did. I could tell early on in our relationship that he was a man of great character, a man of great compassion, a man who really cared about the people of Iraq. And he wanted to represent the country of Japan with distinction. And he did so without question. In November of that same year of 2003, tragedy struck. One of his colleagues, Katsu, was killed in an ambush by some sort of terrorist group in the country. I just remember that hit Yukio very hard. But he persevered. He continued the mission. He didn't let anything stop him to oversee the reconstruction efforts for Iraq, for the country of Japan. That I admired about him, and many, many other things. I left Iraq in 2004, and we maintained a friendship throughout the years until his untimely passing. There were a number of times when I was stationed back in Iraq when he would try to come and visit. When he came to the United States with his wife, Kyoko, we would try to get together, and we did so a number of times. I remember fondly the evening at Ambassador Sase's residence in the United States. What a wonderful evening. Both gentlemen were truly professional, remarkably friendly, and truly genuine. A wise man once told me, "You make a living by getting, but you make a life by giving." Yukio obviously enjoyed a wonderful life. He gave more than he received. It's truly an honor to be here to talk about him tonight. He's a man I admired. He's a man I remembered. And he is a man that I will always try to emulate in what he did for the country of Japan, what he did for the people of Japan, and what he did globally around the world. Thank you very much.
はい。フランク・ヘルミックさん。
That was a video message from Lieutenant General Frank Helmick. We feel how big he was. Mr. Armitage, at the time of Gulf War, you were the Deputy Secretary of State at the time of Iraq War and also Under Secretary of the Army during the Gulf War. Okamoto-san, at time of crisis, when the whole world have to come together as one and united, Japan would pay money, but you can't see the face of it. He was often irritated by that. And Okamoto-san and Mr. Armitage, what was it? What could Japan do at the time of Gulf War? Do you recall having some conversation with him about that?
I do, and with many other of the diplomats. But Yukio didn't need to have a primer course in what needed to be done. At the time, you'll remember, Ando-san, from your own reporting, the two of the more famous statements were after the 9/11 to have show the flag, be involved in the international effort. And then for Iraq in 2003, it was boots on the ground. And ultimately, look what Japan did. they had reconstruction efforts by the JICA in Samoa. An unbelievable distance to travel. And I'm not talking about mileage. I'm talking about intellectual distance, political distance for the then administration to engage in. And one of the reasons they were able to do that because you had a Yukio Okamoto, I believe, who could explain exactly what was needed back in Tokyo.
そうですよね。三宅さんはもう
That is very true. So, Mr. Miyake, Mr. Okamoto, you were, of course, observing very closely the dynamic and courageous activities. No, I was in Beijing at the time. When I had heard from the death of the Katsuhiko Oku, now including the story of the Mosul, I do understand that it was a difficult time, and I also felt very sad on that occasion. Now, Okamoto-san was very active in trying to deliver international cooperation and support from Japan. Ambassador Sasai may know better. In Samoa, the Japanese self-defense force that has been dispatched, and including myself and Mr. Okamoto in 1990 and 1991 during the Gulf War days, there was a trauma of the younger generation of diplomats at the foreign ministry that we were not able to do much at the time. But that with the self-defense force being dispatched to Samoa, we were able to make atonement for that. And I'm sure Mr. Okamoto has been able to make this happen because he was close to Prime Minister Koizumi.
Ambassador Sasae, JFTA was to be deployed in Samoa. Japan was not appreciated. We paid such a sum of money, but it was not appreciated during the Gulf War. Miyake-san referred to it as the trauma of the Ministry of Financial Affairs, but I think it was a trauma for the whole of Japan. The International Society, Ambassador, you often refer that it's a mutually supporting organization. And if we are mutually supporting one another, any country must take risk. But in the case of Japan, we try not to take risk as much as possible, and yet we want to be appreciated by the international community. This, when we think about the relationship between the Middle East, the United States, and Japan, which is risk averse, what should we do as a country? The trauma of Ministry of Financial Affairs, of Foreign Affairs, Kitaoka-san often refers to that. Japan has become a major power, economic power, and contributing to the whole world in economic terms, in other words, paying money, has been the path because we have restrictions from a military perspective, and we cannot do and we don't wish to do make such contributions. But with Gulf War, if we make economic contribution, the people will not be convinced. People will not appreciate. We understood that with the Gulf War, and then with Iraq or in the Middle East. With an invasion into Iraq that has been seen from different angles, and I think there are different critics' comments about that. But Japan as a country, how can we step ourselves out from the comfort zone? I think it was a struggle for us to break us free from that. And in Samoa, it developed in such a way. That must have been very, very difficult. From the United States perspective, maybe we were a debutante, but at least with the political will, Japan has gone a great length and stepped out of the comfort zone. I think that could be appreciated. And this is a long path for us, the self-defense forces, to go overseas and like other countries in Europe and the United States taking on risk. It's still seen with resistance. We should not lose one member of the self-defense forces. That, I think, is the public opinion, but we need to take a realistic view because we need to take risk. We cannot remain risk averse. And the Middle East is a remote place. If it happens in Taiwan or somewhere close to Japan, it's not. We have to deal it as our own problem. So we have to be determined to take that risk at this difficult time. The whole of Japan, everyone in Japan should take on that risk. Be prepared for that. The same applies for business. It's not just about removing the issue of war, but whether it be for peacekeeping operations, when it is in time of need, use of force, adopt a more realistic way of thinking, which is more of an international standard. I think that kind of mindset has to be adopted when it comes to dispatching self-defense forces abroad, because we cannot stick to our own principles. Kitaoka-san, I think, has more comments on that, but the ability of the self-defense forces and the missile defense, and there's also new developments in the military field. With new technologies, just expecting the United States to take care of that, we are no longer living in such a time. Of course, we are always together under the U.S.-Japan alliance, but thinking about various threats, we could think of threats in the Middle East, but the United States will be withdrawing its troops from the Middle East, and so eventually the United States, when there's more turmoil in the Middle East, there will be a time when there could be discussions within the United States to go back to bring their boots on the ground in the Middle East again. So the region that we belong to is very important, but also at the same time have a more global mindset and be ready to play our role in the international community. Mr. Armitage talked about the intellectual and political aspects, but we need to change our mindsets from an intellectual and political perspective. These are very important challenges.
ちょっと伺いたい。
Now, Mr. Kitaoka, I would like to ask you the last question. You have coined the word a fantasy pacifism. That on the history had a question. Okamoto-san was leftist, but on national security he was a rightist. So that is exactly what you would say with the term the fantasy, the pacifism. And Mr. Okamoto said that when you went to the Takeo, that even a sandbag was not to be accumulated, but it was something of a false the alertness. In a high tower, watchtower, you have to show yourself, and that SDF, the people were not able to protect themselves at all. So when they're dispatched, if they're not given anything to protect themselves, they would be truly in a dire situation. So Kitaoka-san, when you say about the fantasy pacifism, thinking about international cooperation, international collaboration, as a member of the international community, what should Japan do going forward? I have started with military history before the war, or as a researcher, as an academic. Japan has made a mistake, and what was wrong is well known. In the post-war period, what I would say the utopian pacifism, the fantasy pacifism, because for the peace, only peaceful means would be made available. That is something wrong. Unless you have a deterrence, you have defense capability. You cannot really have the peace in place. Then Chiang Kai-shek in China, that they has resisted. Is that bad? Was that bad? I wouldn't think that there are the worst kind of war and a little bit better bad war. You need to think about the different types of the different the war. Unless you have deterrence, unless you have defense capability, international order can never be kept or maintained. Now, if I may change the subject. More recently, in the United States, there was a report that there could be side effects of the vaccine for COVID-19. But when you make a research, and even with the risks, the benefits are far larger. So they would have the vaccination to go on. But in Japan, even with the overwhelming benefit, if there is this much of a little risk, Japan would be reluctant. Japan will be hesitant. I don't think that would do in thinking about national security. Risk zero, risk free is something impossible.
すいません、最後にアミテ
We are running out of time, but lastly, to close this panel discussion, Mr. Armitage, may I ask you to make a comment and send a message to the Japanese audience?
Thank you very much, Ando-san. I agree that Yukio Okamoto was a humanist. I also agree that Yukio Okamoto, regarding diplomacy and statecraft, was a realist. He did what you could do, and he asked the question that I started things off with: what ought we to do? I prefer to take what I think would be the ultimate position of Yukio Okamoto on questions of US, Japan, and China, et cetera. And that is that basically, I think we have a right to be optimistic. It wasn't so long ago the Japanese were criticizing themselves in various newspapers for having an aversion to the 3 Ks: dirty, hard, and dangerous work. Those days are gone. Japan has a much more realistic view of her capabilities, her abilities, the limits of her ability, and the extent of her ability. So it gives me a cause for some optimism that I would like to leave with fans of the U.S.-Japan relationship.
大変
Well, that was a very optimistic and positive message. Thank you very much. If Okamoto-san was with us, as I have been listening to all your statements, being optimistic and also being realistic and think in a very long term the prospects for Japan. Kitaoka-san, you mentioned about the vaccination. If Mr. Okamoto was here, then Japan would have already gone ahead to have vaccinated the majority of the Japanese people. Now we have gone above board the time allotted, but this will be the end of part 1 for the symposium. Thank you very much.
さんどうもありがとうございました。パネルディスカッションの前編
This is the end of the first part of the panel discussion. Mr. Armitage, thank you very much for joining us from the United States.
続き
Let us now start part 2 of the symposium. 4 friends of Okamoto-san has sent us video messages. There are 2 from Japan and the United States. They are dear friends of Okamoto-san. Let me introduce in the order of streaming. The first is a former chairperson of the Ritsumeikan University, Dr. Nagata Toyomi. Then, Director, Center for International Studies, MIT, Dr. Richard Samuels, and University Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus, Harvard University, Dr. Joseph Nye. And lastly, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan, Mr. Akiba Takeo. I am Nagata of Ritsumeikan University. I have been wailing in silence since April last year. A year has passed. Images of Okamoto-san come back to me vividly in my memories. I feel a huge sense of loss. My first encounter with Okamoto-san was through American football. Ritsumeikan University is a powerhouse in American football. And when the NFL delegation came to Japan, he invited me to the match and party. Okamoto-san is such a person of knowledge and human touch, warmth. I was particularly inspired by the strong passion he had on young people. Since I was the president of the university, I immediately asked him to give lectures at Ritsumeikan University. He held honors program to train people aspiring to seek an international career where students are able to have a first-hand experience of Japan and the world. This was in 2005. It was a popular program among highly motivated aspiring students. Lectures were held in Kyoto as well as in Tokyo once a year, inviting well-known old acquaintances of Okamoto-san. Students were sometimes invited to his home after class. There were initiatives to send students to different parts of the world, such as China, the United States, India, Kenya, and Palestine. He even set up a scholarship program for it. Through experience, students will not be able to gain through lecture. They were able to directly connect with international politics, economics, and society. 439 students have been inspired by Okamoto-san's lectures and have grown. Okamoto-san, who showed them their possibilities to the world, must have left a strong impression in their hearts and minds to eventually germinate, grow, and blossom. I can imagine him looking delighted with a shy smile. Okamoto-san used to keep extremely rare whiskeys in a hotel bar. When I tried to taste it on the rocks, he would scold me, saying, "Are you going to dilute this precious whiskey with water?" I will never forget the taste of that whiskey. It is such a special memory. Okamoto-san, I thank you for all the advice. And I look forward to giving a toast again someday.
Good afternoon. Yukio Okamoto was a very dear friend of long standing. We first met at Y Plantation in the late 1980s when we participated with his mentor, Watanabe Koji, on a conference panel on US-Japan relations at a particularly fractious moment in the era of so-called Nichibe Masatsu. And I recall how relaxed and how erudite he was and how charismatic. We stayed in touch over the decades. He dropped in to see me at MIT. I dropped in to see him at Kamiyacho, sometimes after intervals of 1 or 2 years, but it never felt like that much time had passed. One such encounter particularly stands out for me. It was one day in the late spring of 2011 while I was in Tokyo to do research for what became a book on the triple catastrophe in northeastern Japan, and I stopped in just for an aisatsu visit. And he asked what I was working on, and when I told him 311, he brought me over to a large table in his office where several photo albums were arrayed. They were filled with photographs of the Tohoku hellscape, but also of the industrial equipment, large shipping containers for shelter, compressors, and other things that he had convinced large Japanese firms to provide to help the local fishing community get back up on its feet. And he took no credit publicly for those efforts, but he took great pride privately and deservedly so. A few years later, he also played a role behind the scenes in convincing Mitsubishi Materials Corporation to apologize to and to compensate nearly 4,000 Chinese laborers who were conscripted into its progenitor, the Mitsubishi Mining Company, during the war. This took courage on everyone's part. Now, my wife Deb and I live in Lexington, Massachusetts. It's the town where the first shots were fired in what would later become the American Revolution. And each April, at almost exactly to this date, Lexingtonians, like all Massachusetts residents, celebrate what is called Patriots' Day. And Patriots' Day begins annually with a pre-dawn, fully costumed reenactment of Paul Revere's ride and the dramatic march of the Redcoats into the town center, where they meet several dozen armed farmers across a 100-meter long village green. The armed battle is followed by competing pancake breakfasts at our local churches. And then there's the 11 o'clock in the morning, a very unusual 11 a.m. Red Sox game and the Boston Marathon. It's a sort of regional trifecta that we locals consider the most wonderful day of the year on our civic calendars. Now, in 2013, Yukio and Kyoko-san stayed at our home the night before the enactment so they could enjoy the full experience. We four stayed up late into the night drinking and talking. And after arriving at the village green before sunrise in time for the reenactment and the pancake breakfast that followed, I then hustled them off back to Boston, insisting that they take up a position near the marathon's finish line, which was just around the corner from their apartment on Commonwealth Ave. Within an hour, the horrible news broke of the marathon bombing and the associated maimings and the deaths. And I can't describe the relief Deb and I felt when we got Yukio on the phone and learned that he and Kyoko were well. They had walked back to their Boston apartment less than 10 minutes before the blasts went off. And by that time, and until his untimely death, Yukio had been a senior fellow at the MIT Center for International Studies that I direct. He was generous with his time, meeting frequently with our faculty and with our graduate students. And I was just delighted that he used MIT as his US base of operations. And at the center, the late Ezra Vogel, Ken Oy, my colleague, Suzanne Berger, another colleague, and Joe Nye, also from Harvard, and I formed a small benkyokai with Yukio to discuss chapters of the memoir that he was writing. He was eager to tell his story, and he finished much of it. It's a story of courage. It's a story of generosity. It's a story filled with insight that I think will illuminate the US-Japan relationship. And we're committed to seeing it through to publication. And we're certainly going to miss and continue to miss Yukio very deeply. Thank you very much.
I'm trying to pay tribute to somebody, Yukio Okamoto, who is going to be deeply missed. Yukio and Kyoko-san were visiting at our house for dinner in Lexington, Massachusetts in November 2019, and we had a wonderful, joyful evening. Yukio had brought me pictures from the newspapers of appearance that he and I had both shared in Tokyo a month or so before that. And it looked like the most important thing would be when we were going to meet again at our next session in Tokyo. It was a complete shock to realize that that would never happen again. And we deeply, deeply miss him. Yukio and I first met because of our mutual interest in the US-Japan Security Treaty. We went to various meetings that were designed to enhance that relationship. As Ambassador Mansfield once said, there is no more important relationship in the world than that between the United States and Japan. And that's something that Yukio and I both believed and both worked to try to make a reality. I must say that Yukio is somebody who contributed enormously to that relationship between the US and Japan. I also remember working with Yukio on a group that Dick Samuels has mentioned, a group that convened at MIT to discuss the draft chapters of Yukio's wonderful autobiography. We had a number of interesting meetings discussing his role, but also the larger role of the US and Japan in the period after 1945. And I always found it enormously refreshing and very, very honest. He sent me many chapters to read, which I would send him back comments. He would reply, and we would also discuss them when we had a chance for the group to come together. This process of working on his autobiography helped not just to deepen my friendship with him, but also to deepen my understanding of Japan and of the U.S.-Japan relationship. Indeed, I'm delighted that Dick said that he is going to ensure that this biography is published, because I think it is a major contribution to the understanding of Japan and the United States and the U.S.-Japan relationship. In that sense, we will remember Yukio. We can never forget him, but we certainly will deeply miss him. He was a great friend personally, a great friend of the U.S., a great enabler of the U.S.-Japanese friendship, and we won't forget him, but we definitely will miss him. So thank you all very much for your attention and sharing these thoughts about Yukio.
Okamoto-san.
I met Okamoto-san when he was the director of Security Division, and I was a newbie at the first North America Division. At the time, he will always say to me, "Akiba, let's have a drink." He took me to places where there were captains of the Japanese industries enjoying their drinks. I was extremely impressed that when you get to be a director, you are able to socialize with these kind of people. I remember that Director Okamoto was always earnestly propounding to the people there of what kind of a country Japan should aspire to be. Even after he left the foreign ministry, he always found time to meet with us to discuss foreign policy. He treated us always as equals. When he came back to work for the government as a special advisor to the Prime Minister, he was consumed with immensely important issues such as Okinawa and Iraq, which could sway the fate of Japan. When I came back from visiting North Korea, accompanying the then Prime Minister Koizumi, immediately I was called by Okamoto-san, and he drilled me about the Pyongyang Declaration, pointing to certain sentences. He was critical of them. I responded by explaining my own thoughts. I remember we engaged in a heated discussion. He was always a diplomat, even after quitting from the foreign ministry. That was the kind of man he was. Mr. Okamoto often went diving. He will always send me New Year's greeting card with underwater photography and pictures of fish. What I noticed was that in many of those photos, a ray of sunlight was beaming from above, and the sunbeam under the sea was usually wavering. That, I thought, was symbolic of what Okamoto-san was always after for. What should he do for his country? How should he behave as a human being? It felt like he was intensely trying to seek for those things in the sun ray under the sea. As he has passed away, Okamoto-san is now my ray of light. Okamoto-san, may you rest in peace.
ナイ教授とサミュエル
Professor Nai and Professor Samuels, the book that was referred to in their video is being edited by Okamoto Associates, and it is going to be published both in Japan and the United States. And with that, we would like to conclude part 2 of the symposium. And now, moving on to the second part of the panel discussion. And those of you who have joined us from the beginning of the symposium. This is a repeat, but we have a questionnaire section on YouTube. We welcome your comments to the symposium and also message to Okamoto-san. Now, what Okamoto-san has always mentioned, what is most critical for an international person is to show kindness to others. This is the topic that we would like to do a deep dive in this session. We have Ambassador Roos from the United States. Ambassador Roos was in Japan from 2009 to 2013 as ambassador to Japan, and he was a great friend of Okamoto-san. Ambassador Roos had experienced the confusion of Futenma issue and the Great East Japan earthquake when he was ambassador to Japan. We also have Professor Maedomari Hiromori of Okinawa International University. He served as editorial writer of Ryukyu Shimpo, but he has had long-time relationship with Okamoto-san from the second half of 2080s. And I hear that they've engaged in arguments over the Okinawa base issue. Ambassador Roos, Professor Maedomari, thank you for joining us. And let me pass the microphone over back to Ando-san. Thank you. And I would now like to start the second part of the panel discussion. In the earlier panel discussion, we talked about the love he had for Japan and his actions as a diplomat. Japan, how should we find our way forward? We had discussions about Japan's path as a country, but now in this part of the panel discussion, we want to talk about Okamoto-san as a person, what he had in mind, what he did, and what he would have done if he were here with us. As a person, Okamoto-san, that is what we would like to focus in this part of the discussion. And the theme is what he put his heart and mind into Okinawa. Ambassador Roos, Okamoto-san has often referred to Ambassador Roos as one of the best and wonderful ambassadors from the United States after war. And when I've had an interview with Ambassador Roos, I recall very clearly Okamoto-san talking about you in that way. Your relationship with Okamoto-san, and I'm sure they've had a lot of challenges over Okinawa. If you could recall your relationship with Okamoto-san, any memories that you might want to share with us?
Well, thank you, Ando-san, and thank you to JICA for putting on this really important symposium. I've been tuning in from California from the beginning, and you can't help but be incredibly moved not only by Okamoto-san's accomplishments, but the deep friendships he had with so many important people in the U.S.-Japan relationship. And I'm privileged and honored to be here. You know, I don't go as far back with Yukio as many who are participating in this symposium. But our relationship became, in my view, very, very deep. When I first came to Japan in 2009, I sought out Okamoto-san because he had a reputation as one of the towering figures in U.S.-Japan relations. And we've heard so much about how he taught and loved teaching students. Well, I considered myself, even though I was a U.S. ambassador at the time, to be his student. He was a person with deep knowledge, experience, an amazing character, empathy, an ability to see all different sides, even though obviously he always had his own opinion. And we just developed not only a business relationship, but a friendship. I recall with vivid memory and fondness how he would come over to the ambassador's residence and we would sit in the library of the U.S. ambassador's residence, which was a special room for many U.S. ambassadors. And we would just talk, not only about the challenges that I was facing at the time, we were facing with the Okinawa situation, but a broad range of issues involved in U.S.-Japan relations. And I think during that time, I made one significant mistake. I served him a whiskey that apparently was not up to his standards. And what he said to me is, next time, Mr. Ambassador, let's go across the street to the Okura Hotel, to the Highlander Bar, which we did. And he introduced me to a single malt liquor whiskey, stirred 300 times, ice cold. It was, I could never go back to the whiskey that we served at the U.S. Embassy. And just like he introduced me to that unique way of drinking, he introduced me and taught me so much during our time together. And when I heard that he had lost his life to COVID, which so many families have suffered so much, it really hit close to home. And he will be missed. He was a rare figure in U.S.-Japan relations and an incredible human being.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you. The whiskey that was served by Ambassador Okamoto-san said, "This is not my taste." Oh, I wonder what kind of person he was. Well, Professor Maedomari, you've had a lot of quarrels with Okinawa-san about the futenma. You've had huge arguments with him, and in your eulogy, you said that you've lost your counterpart for argument. What was he like? As it has been shared by others, and someone has said to him that he would he has this magnet power that would turn the other person to his side. And I was in the media covering the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we've often had discussions on his position on Okinawa. And when I went back to Okinawa in '95, there was this violence to a girl. It was a crime in '95, and then there was this relocation to Henoko, and I had a call from Okamoto-san directly to me, and we have talked about it, and it was written in the eulogy, and people criticize that it doesn't sound like a eulogy, but the pain in Okinawa, how could it be removed? That's the critical point. Prime Minister Hashimoto said that that's quite critical, and so that's what I want to talk about. But in Okinawa, that the new base is going to be established, that people are resistant to that. But he was not an easy person to argue with. Every time we talk, he would send me an email that is so lengthy. I hope you can see it. I would receive very lengthy emails from him, and I had to revert back, and I also made calls and so forth, removing the burden on Okinawa, the impact on Okinawa that was mentioned, but the idea was to move the base to Hokubu. He was quite active as an advisor, I would say, and people like Kajiyama-san, and also Professor Shimada of Keio University. Osprey, sorry, in Futenma Air Base is very noisy behind me, but I feel that there is destiny that I have to have my office right next to it. The pain to be alleviated where there is an air base, and also for the reconstruction of the Hokubu area, 200 billion or close to 400 billion in budget has been appropriated or taken from the Japanese government, allocated to Okinawa, and also places like Osaka or Fukuoka. people volunteer that they could relocate to these places, but he insisted it has to be Okinawa. And when I asked him why he's working on it, he said that the summit to be held in 2000 in Okinawa, not in Fukuoka or Osaka, to send out that message that Okinawa is in Japan and that that's a place that summit should be held. And so to Obuchi, Prime Minister, a special letter was submitted to the Prime Minister. And when we were successful in inviting the summit to Okinawa, I asked Okamoto-san for a comment, and he got very angry because the person, when he took the phone, he was in the toilet and he was busy. And so when his comments that he made appeared in the newspaper, and so he got very angry because it sounded like his privacy was being infringed. But so the summit to be held in Okinawa, that was a surprising development. There was a person who was responsible for Okinawa from MOFA, and he asked me what kind of know-how there is in working this out. Okamoto-san used the schematic diagrams and to convince the people. And U.S.-Japan relationship, what is the position of Okinawa? I feel that Okamoto-san always had this in mind. I've been willing to make my students to read Okamoto-san's writing, and so I've set up Okamoto Library together with my students, and there's going to be a bookshelf where we will have books that are related to Okamoto-san, and this book is also one of them. In this book, what he says, it talks about Senkaku Islands. It's an integral part of Japan, which is admitted by the United States. And after the war, Senkaku, where Japanese people used to live, why was it that they were no longer able to live? Because it was used as a shooting ground by the U.S. Army. And that's why Japanese residents were pushed out of the island. It's mentioned in the book. It's the U.S. Army that made the place not accessible by the residents, and 394 times the place was used for shooting, and yet the U.S. is taking a neutral position on the territorial rights over Senkaku. There's something wrong about that. With regards to the status of forces agreement, we've had a lot of discussions. This is a place, Senkaku Islands is offered as a place for shooting to the United States, but the fact that the Chinese naval forces are passing by, why is the United States remaining silent if it is not being used under SOFA or status of force agreement? It could, U.S. should claim that it's not right. And if it's claimed to be returned, what will the United States do if it is using it as a shooting ground? So thinking of Okinawa, of the messages that Okinawa said, Okamoto-san said, Japan, for Okinawa, what is the responsibility of Japan to Okinawa? It's the negligence of the Japanese government over its responsibility of over Okinawa. So 65% of U.S. bases on mainland has been reduced, but no air base in Okinawa has been reduced after the war. Ichikawa, which is a very famous historian in the United States, wrote about Okinawa history, like in this book. In the history of Ryukyu, what it says is that Ryukyu, for Japan, is an expendable. It's an expendable for Japan. It could be replaced. It could be substituted. For Japan, Okinawa is an expendable. It could be substituted by something. If something happens to Okinawa, Japan will try to protect itself. And the leaders who've governed over Okinawa. Even MacArthur was referring to Okinawa as an expendable. And Japan will be dealing with Okinawa as such. So that's the kind of historical view that has been researched. And in terms of listening to the voices of the people in the field, Dr. Kitaoka said that on the other side of security, there is a true, real human being, flesh and blood, and having a deep relationship with real human beings. This is what Okamoto-san said. Okamoto-san, 160 islands. He visited all these small islands, and he has had discussions with all the key persons in these islands beyond what I could do as a journalist. So I think, Professor Maidomari, we want to ask comments from other people in the room.
So Ambassador Sasae, Professor Maidomari here has told us that he met not only with the mayors, but that he met with all sorts of different people in the community and listened to their views of what they want for Okinawa. So he tried to collect the information. And he also visited the bars frequented by the U.S. Soldiers, even the young soldiers. He listened to their comments as well. He has been to Okinawa more than 50 times. I understand that the people were grumbling under the Hashimoto administration as a special advisor to the Prime Minister. He always said that there are people over there. What are the pains for them? What are the concerns for them? You need to empathize. You need to listen to them. You need to put yourselves into their shoes. So, Ambassador Sasai, what would you think? What Okamoto-san has been doing in foreign policy as a diplomat, as well as something else, to make contact with the people. It is human being to human being. You need to think about the positions that the other person is placed in, that you may have different positions, you may have different thoughts, but even so, you need to work together. You need to cooperate. If you would like to move those people, you need to say and convey that you are in earnest, in good faith, do understand the situation that the other person is placed in. At the time, I was in a different department. I was not at all involved with the Okinawa issue, but the feeling and the struggling of Okamoto-san at the time, I listened to his complaints at the bars when we had drinks. Now, for Futenma, the issue, the relocation issue, Okamoto-san, when he was trying to go to Henoko, he had different ideas, all sorts of different ideas. He has made suggestions. It was not of his own thoughts, but as he listened to the engineers, the people on the ground, the different sorts of people, and he has reflected those thoughts into his ideas. And he has shown those ideas to the top leaders, like Minister Kajiyama, the Chief Cabinet Secretary, and others. And that he was told that he should put them aside. And this would be listened to as the plan B when they would be needed. So Okamoto-san, I'm sure Miyake-san would have his own thoughts, but for such a long time that relocation is not happening is because of the emotion, because of the feeling, and of course the interests of people will also be the issue, but the feelings and emotions of the people matter. You need to have the people to be sincerely and genuinely want to work with the government as well as the U.S. forces. And now the person who has already passed away, Ambassador Nakaima, Governor Nakaima, he has already passed away. When I was an ambassador in the United States, he came to the United States, and we had discussion on the Futenma-related issue. When I wanted to touch upon this, the Governor Nakaima said, no, you don't have to state anything. I do know your position very well. You're the member of the government. So the answer would be the same across the board. I was so sad. I was being looked upon as just one bureaucrat of the government, one wheel of the cog, so to speak, because I did not have any the way to relate to him emotionally. I was not Mr. Okamoto. I'm not sure whether Mr. Okamoto was anticipating what would be happening today. I'm sure he had been regretting sincerely that things did not move as he wanted. And now I'm sure there are different arguments as to how to move this issue forward. I wouldn't say anything here, but the feelings, the emotions matter very much, not only for the Okinawa issue, but also the issues to do with Asia, the relationship with China, with the ROK, and also North Korea. This is something we need to squarely face. This is something beyond anything in writing. We need to think about the human beings behind, the people with the hot blood. So what Okamoto-san had tried to do is truly meaningful and relevant.
Kitaoka-san, in dealing with security, we need to think of the blood and flesh on the other side. There are human beings, and otherwise, without showing understanding to the people, we will not be able to reach any kind of agreement. Okamoto-san had a very good understanding of that. Yes, Okinawa has a very strategic location geographically, and that's why Perry arrived at Okinawa first. So that's the strategic significance, but the security is not made of that alone. I mean, it's the feeling of the people that is very important. The greatest weakness for Japan is Okinawa. Okinawa is an integral part of Japan, and Japan is going to support and protect Okinawa, whatever happens. Unless they believe in so, nothing is going to change. We haven't taken that path, and various administrations after the war have paid money. But have they really stood by Okinawa to share the burden, the impact of Okinawa? No other prefecture is taking on that burden. It's the same as scheme as Japan paying money at the time of Gulf War. And the spirit of hands-on approach that Okinawa said, this is very critical. The strategic thinking of the central government has to tie in with that hands-on approach. So we always need to keep revising the current plan.
Mr. MIYAKE, earlier that there was the story here that to make a G7 summit in Okinawa to happen, and not just verbally, but he was able to make a breakthrough to make it actually happen. So his relationship with Okinawa, how was he able to win the trust and confidence of the people in Okinawa? That is exactly the important thing. His feeling for Okinawa was very genuine. I was observing him right at the side. As Professor Maidomari has been stating earlier, Okinawa is not something expendable. At least for Okamoto Yukio, that has taught many the young diplomats at the foreign ministry and in the government. Those people do not believe that Okinawa is expendable. Okinawa is something of indispensable member and part of Japan. So I'm sure Okamoto-san's the thoughts would be passed on and continued by many people.
And sorry for interrupting here and there, but there is one more topic, a very important topic that we must cover today. The pain of Okinawans. Always bearing in mind, Okamoto-san, I think, was always thinking about this and trying to address the Okinawan issue. But also on this front, he has given furious energy to address it.
Good morning. I am Koizumi Shinjiro, Minister of Environment. I understand you are gathered for the symposium held in memory of Mr. Okamoto Yukio, who passed away 1 year ago. I would first of all sincerely convey my regards for those of you who worked hard to prepare for this symposium. I have been often remembering Okamoto-san on various occasions, while at work. While I am thinking about Tohoku, I always think of Okamoto-san, and of course when I'm drinking whiskey. In particular, together with Okamoto-san, when we went to Onagawa, that is still fresh in memory. And we were chided by Okase-san at the time. But as I continued to visit Onagawa since then, it has become a fond memory. Whenever I eat the fresh seafood bowl, I always remember the fresh seafood bowl we ate in Onagawa. That was the best seafood bowl I ever had in my life. Everything about Okamoto-san and Tohoku is firmly connected in my mind. One challenge I face today is the release into the sea of Fukushima nuclear power plant's treated water. After the decision is taken by the government, as the Environment Minister, I will take on the role of chairing the Coordination Council for Monitoring. How to gain the trust of all those related to the fishery industry? How can I make sure that the Signal of Hope project championed by Okamoto-san will genuinely become the hope for the fishermen? If Okamoto-san was still alive, he may once again freshly restart the Signal of Hope. In my mind, I will firmly keep on firing this signal of hope kindled by Okamoto-san to continue trying to obtain confidence of the fishermen in Fukushima and the whole nation to overcome the problems one by one. Although this time I am conveying my thoughts in the form of a video message, I am looking forward to meet you all in person. I will commit myself to do my best for the challenge in front of me. Okamoto-san, thank you for all you have taught me. I would like to offer my sincere condolences to the bereaved family. Please take care and be safe. And as a politician and as a human being, I shall always hold dear what Okamoto-san has shown me. I thank you for the kind attention. Okamoto Sensei, can you see the newly transformed Onagawa town from heaven above? We were able to come this far because of Mr. Okamoto's support. I will now ask several members of the Signal of Hope project, led by Mr. Okamoto, to say a few words. We were devastated, but we were able to reopen the fish market in July because of Mr. Okamoto. I am so grateful to you. I sincerely pray for the repose of your soul. Mr. Okamoto, we met in the aftermath of the great earthquake and tsunami. Our encounter led to the launch of the Signal of Hope group. It was all thanks to you, Mr. Okamoto. I pray that you will rest in peace in heaven. Thank you ever so much. This is Ishimori, served as Secretariat for the Signal of Hope project in Onagawa. Our town was able to bounce back with all the help from Mr. Okamoto. I am sincerely grateful. We will never forget you. Mr. Okamoto, I thank you deeply. Please rest in peace. An year has already passed. When I heard of Okamoto-san's passing, I was reminded of how great a person he was and the great loss to our community. In the disaster that hit us 10 years ago, more than 70% of Onagawa town was destroyed and lost. The fishery industry was damaged more than 80%. We had to stand up from there. Mr. Okamoto was at the center of the Signal of Hope project. The fishing grounds, fish processing businesses, all were helped enormously. I am here today at the office of the new fish market. The market was rebuilt and reopened. We have made a fresh start. We were able to take a step forward thanks to Mr. Okamoto's support. As Okamoto-san is no longer with us, we will do our best to fill in the vacuum, to vigorously move forward, to give back and repay for the kindness he has shown us. I pray that he will rest in peace, and I also appreciate all the consideration given by all of you in supporting us.
Miyake-san, you are the Secretary General of the Signal of Hope Fund. I'm sure Okamoto-san was extremely serious about this. Yes, he is a man of sea, so I think he was related to the ocean. And there's one thing that I want to say today. I was Secretary General, and Okamoto-san was wonderful, but the Sawafuji-san is a person who supported him, of course, aside of Kyoko-san. He is like the hidden president of Okamoto Associates. Without her, he will not exist. And I was the Secretary General. That is true. I can recall, and I was able to do it freely. Sawafuji-san was the secretary, and when Okamoto-san was at the cabinet office, she would call me. Okamoto Yukio is not around. He's always out. I can't speak to him. What should I do? And so I said, oh, that's easy. It's simple. Feel like you are Okamoto-san and decide on it and take action. Whatever you do, Okamoto-san is going to acknowledge your actions. That's the kind of boss he was. So this is inclusive of Onagawa, but the Signal of Hope project, everyone was so excited. But there was just one time that I was scolded by him, and I was wondering why he was so angry. But in all the villages, all the cities, he visited all the communities. This place is lacking. There's shortage in this community. He was looking at the balance across all the communities, and that's something that was missing on my part. But again, Sawafuji-san, I wanted to emphasize what a wonderful role she played.
Ambassador Roos, you were also engaged in Operation Tomodachi, and I had covered in my story and put into my program. That was a great operation. Now, the Tomodachi initiative that followed and others, in many ways, you have been involved in supporting the Tohoku area. So what was your feeling vis-a-vis Tohoku at that time? And also talk to us on your friendship with Okamoto-san, please.
Well, obviously, everything changed when the Great East Japan earthquake hit on March 11th. And at that point in time, much of my ambassadorship was devoted to both the military operation, the civilian operation, the all-of-government response, and then Ando-san, as you said, after we created the Tomodachi initiative to invest in the young people of Tohoku and help them connect to the United States, which, by the way, to this day, several thousand young Japanese and Americans have participated, which I believe is building the future of the relationship. Okamoto-san and I met on this, and it was interesting. He provided insights and advice, and we were talking about different ways to help the Tohoku region. And I remember the Signal of Hope project very vividly, because he brought out maps of the region, how the fisheries had been so massively negatively affected by the earthquake and tsunami, and how people's livelihoods were coming to an end. And in addition to investing in the young people, he wanted to invest in the economy and the more senior people to reinvigorate their lives and their livelihoods. And just as I saw he did in Okinawa, and as we discussed, travel there, learn to understand the nitty-gritty issues. He did the same thing in the Tohoku region. He traveled continually up to that region and created this amazing project that, as we just heard, fundamentally changed the lives of so many people. And I think in the end, that is probably the most any of us can ask for in life, is to have a positive impact on the lives of others, as others have touched upon earlier. And Okamoto-san clearly accomplished that.
本当にまさにその通りで。
Completely agree with you. As Ambassador Roos mentioned, he has deeply involved in the future of young people, and he had a lot of hope for it. Professor Maidomari, Okamoto-san, would try to understand the situation of the local people, and he would try to understand where the pain is. He would go through all the effort that applied to Okinawa and also to Tohoku, and all the same. Any points on that? Yes, it's mentioned in the book, but for Iraq, Okinawa, Tohoku, everything, the roots was in Okinawa, he said. And as mentioned by Ambassador Roos, at the time of the Great East Japan earthquake, the fisheries would have trouble if there are no ice rooms, coolers in at the ports. So he made arrangements for those to arrive for the fisheries. So he is helping real human beings. That's the strength, I think, of him as a diplomat. Being a diplomat, being able to work through your blood and flesh, that is very important. Not Nakaima governor, but Governor Onaga, Governor Nakaima is still quite healthy. So I'm sorry about that.
So, what Ambassador Sasai was talking about, that was the meeting with Governor Onaga. Yes, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Sorry for that. Now, Mr. Kitaoka, to be kind to the others. For the Japanese, the outside of your own group, you cannot to really show that kindness. The Japanese are not good at expressing ourselves, our kindness. But what need to do is to have a good relationship with the people on the other side. What JICA has been doing, how to allocate the ODA assistance, and also to support and give cooperation to the outside, to be kind to the others. I believe what you're doing with exactly the policy activity for that. At the Okamoto Roundtable, as I mentioned earlier, in the report, there has been a discussion at length suggesting that we should try to increase the ODA. And when he was thinking about the other party, it was not really something in abstract. He was always thinking about the warm-blooded human beings on the other side. And now, for the 70th anniversary statement by Prime Minister Abe in the post-war period, to commemorate the post-war period, he also suggested that the terminology like invasion, incursion should not be used by different people. But Okamoto-san and I agreed that we have caused all the trouble and nuisance to our neighbors. It was a very bad war. We need to follow up. For the legal actions that have been taken, but what or who was responsible was the top people in the government and in the military. We, in our generation, need not to think about the responsibility, but we need to know about the history. We must be aware of the history. That was what we agreed, and that was how we have drafted the statement for the victims of the war and the bereaved family, that we should make friends with them. And he was always telling me these stories. And what was most impressive in our roundtable discussion was that when he visited Afghanistan and he met with the victims there, and how to be kind to them. He was always sympathizing and empathizing. And when he was Special Advisor to JICA in Rwanda, 10% or so of the whole population have been massacred. But the people in Rwanda that have stood up very courageously, he told me that story. Realism means that you need to be close to the people on the ground, who have been embattled and been suffering. And Mr. Okamoto was a person who has made that in a grand scale.
ルース大使、
We are nearing the end of our program. Ambassador Roos, once again, for Okamoto-san and to Japan, may I have a message from you?
Well, my message is what a wonderful human being. The U.S.-Japan relations are so critically important, and I think everyone that's participated in the symposium on both sides of the Pacific have made this point. But every once in a while, a person comes along that truly has an oversized impact on that relationship. And I would put Yukio Okamoto on that list. He was thoughtful, he knew his history, he was empathetic, and he didn't speak lightly, but he was an advocate for what was best in the U.S.-Japan relationship and for his country. And so I can't tell you how much I admire him and the incredible life he led.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Maidomari, what about you? Yes, I have mentioned in my eulogy that when you lose your fighting enemy, it is so sad. He was through and through a diplomat. And he was sometimes criticized that he was too pro-United States. But I have always rebutted that Okamoto-san was always a patriot, thinking always of the national interest of Japan. And that was the kind of diplomat, and so deeply committed to Okinawa. Prime Minister Hashimoto and Mr. Nonaka Hiromu and Mr. Shimakobe, all of those people who have been involved. But he was the person who was always deeply thinking about what kind of solution should be brought for Okinawa. Be it Iraq, Okinawa, or be it the nuclear issue and so forth. I hope that we will be able to have a similar roundtable in the future.
Miyake-san, over to you. Strategic environment in East Asia has transformed itself. Now is the time, more than ever, that we need Yukio Okamoto. We're reaching an end of a pacifist nation. We have lost a person who could lead our way. This is quite critical. I will not be in his place. I think we should work together to pass on his intentions. Sasai-san, please.
Ambassador Sasai, he was too great a person. So to try to follow his footstep is no easier feat. looking at the Japanese politics and the government and those people in the private sector, there are people with good ambitions, and the people in active duty are also doing their best. But we need to make efforts that those people who have good intentions and good ambitions should be given the place and opportunity. I have become older. Now I would like to hand over to the younger generation.
The greatest crisis for Japan is the title of his book. And I think that the Japanese people, each one of them, creating a framework around itself and trying to adjust itself, that should not happen. Self-loathing, I think, should be the way forward. And I call about this in JICA. If you think this is the right way, unless you are restricted by law, you should challenge it. Not looking at the previous examples, just referring to previous examples and trying to excuse yourself or not challenge, that should not be the way forward. The starting point for Japan is to challenge oneself. What I've been saying in the university is to tell students to be in the batter's box. If you were the prime minister today, what decision will you make? It's only by going through this exercise, the mental exercise, that you are able to make the right decision going forward. And this is a point that I am in great agreement with Okamoto-san.
Okamoto-san was always very passionate about education. The youth, the younger people, what can they do for your own country? You need to have an educational process where people will be able to think about their own country, that they will be able to do something. Now, Okamoto-san, as was mentioned earlier, he has given his conclusion in the compendium of his speeches. The vision beyond our passion would be to put a stop to the decline of Japan. I do not want to die witnessing a declining Japan, so I will continue to help. If I am asked, I will go anywhere to have discussion and say black is black and white is white. That is the kind of nation that we need to create. I think that was indeed the exact summary of Okamoto-san was always aspiring for. We want to continue and pass on this thought to the younger generation. Thank you. I would like to thank the panelists as well as Ms. Ando.
もう一つ
Okamoto-san had another face. He was a person who loved the ocean and the nature. Inspiration is a powerful starting point, he often said, and this inspiration should not be given. It should be something that you find yourself. Okamoto-san had been extremely busy, but through his busy schedule, he would go out to different seas, and the Red Sea in Egypt was a place he was fond of to dive, and he was taking underwater photographs. And he also loved the people, the sea, and nature of each of the places that he visited. We have received a video message from a dear friend of him, a longtime friend from the time Okamoto-san was working at the Embassy of Japan in Egypt, Mr. Samir Aziz.
First, my wife and I present our deepest condolences to Kyoko-san and Yasuo-san for their terrible loss. I had met Okamoto-san for the first time at the Embassy of Japan in 1982. We went together several times to Sinai for diving in the Red Sea. 10 years ago, he came back to Egypt for diving. In April 2020, Okamoto Associates informed us of the very sad and terrible news. He was a giant with a golden heart, and he will be missed all around the world. Rest in peace, my dear friends.
そしてもう一人は中村育
Another person is Ikuo Nakamura. He is a close friend and the most well-known underwater photographer in Japan. They have dived together numerous times, and together today, Nakamura-san has sent us video footage and photographs of Okamoto-san diving in the Red Sea. Let me deliver with his message. I am Ikuo Nakamura, an underwater photographer. I am of the same age as Yukio Okamoto-san, and we called each other Yukio-san and Ikuo-san. Yukio-san found joy in Egypt, immersed in the blue world of the Red Sea, taking photographs of beautiful landscapes and fish. For the summer holidays that come once a year, Yukio-san invited me many times to the Red Sea. Even when digital camera flourished, he insisted on using films. He was a man of principle. It could have been a reflection of that. The photos he had taken would put professionals to shame. There are numerous photos of my travel with Yukio-san in my film lockers and personal computer. As I see those photos, I realize how much and unbearably I miss him. Yukio-san's last novel, Hans and George, Journey to the Timeless Sea, illustrates the charm of the Red Sea in Egypt that captivated him. In the meantime, he was very sensitive to sea pollution and was deeply worried of the environmental changes on Earth. Love for people will lead to love for the Earth. Love will end war and make us more considerate of the world environment. That is what I took as message from Yukio-san. Yukio-san, are you diving in your favorite Red Sea? Don't you feel lonely by yourself? The photo novel that was completed after his death, Hans and George. I wonder if you are familiar with this. This is the book. It's his first novel. He had brought the manuscript to the bed in his hospital, revising it. 2020, February, for 1 year. It was available online in the series, and it was published from Shinyodo in January this year. It's a story of a Napoleon fish, George, going on an adventure from the Red Sea, where he was born and grew up, and hence finding hope after losing his beloved family. The story takes place in Egypt, Ras Mohammed. The book contains 45 photographs, including beautiful photographs Okamoto-san himself took in the Red Sea. In the postscript, he says as following. In the story of Ogawa that I was fond of when I was small, there is a part that talks about this. Human beings developing railways and power lines. At some point in time, just one tree or flower might be gone from the surface of the earth. There is no pause for human beings, and if we don't feel that we are exhausted, the surface of the earth will easily become a desert. A boy called Kay would distribute sand of fatigue around the world. And this story was written more than 100 years ago in 914. And Mime was not against civilization, but at that point in time, Mime was already asking the value of human beings. From the caveat that she gave, compared to today, the whole world is changing at a rapid pace. And if what will happen to our Earth if we live at this pace? As Hans said to Peter, if we speak figuratively of the history of the Earth in a day, only 1 second has passed since human civilization. And just because we have an advanced civilization, could we afford to destroy the Earth? No way. As for myself, I've also been at the mercy of IT, buying PCs one after the other, but not anymore. We need to get off that rapid train, lay down in the meadows, and watch the white clouds flow by, looking up at the sky and imagining Hans, Clara, and Peter think of the delicate emotions of human beings, how they might have thought. This is why I decided to write my first ever novel. This is what Mr. Okamoto wrote in the postscript, a part of it. Miss Shigemi Okazaki of Shunyudo, who edited Hans and George, with all her heart, has wrote a commentary. And to close the symposium, let me read out a part of the commentary with photos from under the water taken by Okamoto-san. Never-ending slaughter, repeated environmental destruction. Why are human beings so foolish and cruel? Do we have hope in mankind? If we do, where do we find hope? At a time when human beings are about to close our minds in despair, Okamoto Yukio-san had an answer ready for us in a story. An old eccentric diver, Hans, and Napoleon fish, George, who can't get along with colleagues, appear in the story. The two meet in the beautiful Red Sea. Words echo between the two, and they deepen their friendship. Hans, who was all by himself, was helped by the beautiful wife Clara and beloved daughter Lyra. Misfortune brings darkness of despair, but after grief, he realizes the meaning of life and love. In the meantime, George, encouraged by Hans, swims out of the Red Sea where he grew up. He encounters a savage primate tribe called human beings that entomb immigrants to sea and appallingly destroy the environment. George, shaken in anger, is given courage from a word of Shilikan's. All life came from the ocean. George goes back to his hometown, Red Sea, and meets a cruel diver. The story, told against the backdrop of a beautiful Red Sea with rays of light shining through, might be asking us how to protect the jewel, Earth. When you read the last chapter and quietly close your eyes, readers are likely to realize where there is hope in this world. Life is connected and wish is passed on. That small box under the Yolanda coral that Hans loved. I have a strong hunch that the box contains Okamoto-san's warm feelings. And lastly, President of Okamoto Associates, Mr. Okamoto Yasuo, will give a closing remark.
Yes. I have been passed on from Yukio I am Okamoto Yasuo. I am now the president of Okamoto Associates. It seems that there are so many distinguished little brothers in foreign ministry. I am the actual lit brother, not so perhaps the great. What I can boast of, I was the very first teacher of the teaching about the single malt whiskey to Yukio at the Highlander Bar at the Hotel Okura. Now, Miss Ando, the doll you had with you, I had to have given that doll, and he was so impressed. He wanted to buy so many dolls that he would like to give to so many friends. Now, President Kitaoka and the staffs of JICA, I would like to take the opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to hold this wonderful symposium. If there was to be a message from Yukio, I'm sure he would have congratulated all of you, and he would have sent a message that all of you will now continue my work, do good, and do your best. Now, I was truly moved and touched by listening to all the statements and comments from his friends and acquaintances. I'm sure Kyoko will be in the same position as me. Now, how Yukio has lived his life, I was able to share with all of you today. I was so happy of this. Through the symposium today, if there was some clue or some hint for your own activities going forward, I hope that you yourselves will be able to make the society better, to make Japan better, to put your own energy into this to make it happen. I am truly thankful and grateful for all the kind words. There were many thoughts which were good food for thought for me to think about from now onwards. Now, Yukio, as many of you has repeatedly said, when he had encountered a problem, he would not just look at from the one perspective, but from different perspectives, and think about the feeling of the other people on the other side, and think about what kind of situation they are placed in. And the very source of how to look at the world, how to think about the world, there was an actual experience. When I myself and Yukio were small, I was the fourth grade in elementary school, and when Yukio was in the first grade at the junior high, more than 60 years ago, in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, it was called the Malay the Federation at the time. We were living there, and we went to the local school for about 18 months or so. And we had made many friends there. The Malay people, Chinese people, British people, the Indian people. There were many diverse friends, and we were able to listen to their views and adopt their the way of thinking. And now Yukio was always opening his eyes to the whole world, to the foreign countries. So that, I believe, was why he became a diplomat. And he was always trying to absorb the views and the knowledge of the other people, of the people that he met, the views and philosophies of the others. He was always learning, and he was trying to reflect all those things in his own actions and behaviors. He was very kind to me as a brother, and I was very close to him. And outside of home, he was a great expert on national security. He was someone I always admired and looked up to. And he was taken away, whilst he may have been able to do many great things for many years. And I am so sad that he was taken away abruptly by the epidemic. Now, those of you who have made statements today and who are listening to us, I hope that you would continue the aspiration and ambition of Yukio, so that you will give us a hand to help the whole world. Sorry for being rather disorganized, but I am becoming rather emotional. But truly, I am grateful and thankful for all of you.
Okamoto Associates, Okamoto.
President of Okamoto Associates, Mr. Okamoto Yasuo, thank you very much for the closing remark. And with this, we would like to conclude the symposium Remembering OKAMOTO Yukio, JICA Special Advisor. The time was so limited, with so many people who have a lot to talk about, Okamoto-san, but unfortunately, we have come to the end of the time. Those of you who are watching us online, and also those of you in this room, please join me in a big round of applause to the panelists and the moderators. Thank you very much. Today's symposium will be released as a JICA channel archive on YouTube. And as I have been requesting to the audience, in the YouTube, we have a questionnaire section. Any comments on the symposium, and also message to Okamoto-san, anything is welcomed. Please fill out the questionnaire. And I want to thank you once again for staying with us until the very end of the symposium.